Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Novelists Unwind. I'm so glad to be here with you today. And I'm just going to say the reason for this background. If you've been watching lately, you'll notice I seem to have a different background every time I interview someone. I just moved. So I got here Monday afternoon, and things are still a bit in an uproar. So that's why the blank wall. But let's get started on our interview. I'm so excited to have with me Jolina Petersheim. Jolina and I met when she was a guest on a weekly online writing show I co-host with a couple of other authors called Writers Chat. And she was just so delightful there that I knew I had to get her as a guest. And then I started reading The Alliance. I had it delivered to this address, and it was a day late. I was a day late getting here, a day later than I thought I would be. So I only started reading it last night, and I will tell you, it's so hard to put down. I mean, I just wanted to stay up all night and finish reading it. But it's so, so good. Not only is she a great storyteller, but her writing is just beautiful. So, Jolina, you write Amish books that are not the typical Amish books at all. So, tell us a little bit about your background and how you in your writing journey.
I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where a lot of the Mennonites and Amish come from, and my dad went to Mennonite high school up there. My mom has a Brethren background, but we actually moved from Pennsylvania when I was 3 to Tennessee, and so we kind of raised down here, so I'm a little bit of a Southern belle, I guess you'll say, but I still have that background. My family always remained close to the Amish Mennonites in our area, but when I was growing up and really became an avid reader, I shunned, if you will, the Amish genre because it felt too close to me. And sometimes when things are too close to you, you can't see the interest in it. But years later, when I had already dabbled with some Southern fiction, I was told a story about the price of desire that was left unchecked and how it trickled down to the generations, affecting not only that family, but the generations that came after it. And I thought, wow, that's a novel. And it was set it all took place in a Mennonite community, and a woman had a child illegitimately through a Mennonite man, and she hid it until that child had the same genetic abnormality as the father. And I thought of the Scarlet Letter and a puritanical society, and I thought the Mennonites or the Amish, they're like the puritanical society that we have left. And it just kind of all clicked for me. And I am familiar. So they say, write what you know, but I didn't want to do that because it wasn't as intriguing. But then I decided to write what I knew. And that was The Outcast, the premise for my debut. And yeah, it was fun to kind of just tap into that world and explore it and to kind of pull out some different threads of the community that not many people get to see. And that's the reason that Tyndale House picked it up. They had never published an Amish fiction novel before The Outcast because they didn't want to get on the bandwagon or the buggy, so to speak. And so that was fun. And my agent actually he was raised Amish, so that's fun. We kind of all huddle together, I guess.
That is such a great story. I just love the way God took your upbringing and kind of brought it full circle. So you're living the life you want to live, and yet you're able to dig into those roots and tell this amazing story, and achieved quite notable acclaim for it. So tell us about some of the awards or the mentions that The Outcast received.
It got a star review in Library Journal, which was really fun for me. As you know, I was 25. I remember when I received that feedback from my publicist. I was like, really, a star review? I didn't really know what all that meant, but I knew it was a good thing. And so they were able to put that on the next novel's cover and kind of promote it that way, which really helped just kind of get the story going as far as sales and everything goes. And then we had, it was mentioned in the Tennessean. They did an article. I had a connection to a fine journalist at the Tennessean, and he was kind enough to interview me. And I think because of the Amish or the Mennonite background and having that kind of tie-in, people were intrigued by that. So that was wonderful. And just people were so kind to just open themselves to me, like independent bookstores and in Georgia, Foxtail Bookstore. We had a great launch party there. My mom had Miller's Amish Country Store at the time. So we had a shindig there. My best friend played music, and
A shindig, I love it.
I am clogged. I like bluegrass, clogged.
Well, this is the first. You're the first author I've had on here who clogs. So yay.
Yes, yeah. Play the mandolin, or I did when I was growing up. But it was a lot of fun. It had a lot of just people behind it who helped support it, and that meant so much to me. Shelf awareness, or She Reads mentioned it, and some different people, and I was blown away by it, really.
Great. That's great to get that kind of recognition, especially for a debut novel. That's wonderful. And then you followed that up with The Midwife. Is that correct? Is that the second book? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
The Midwife kind of came to me just as I gave birth. When I signed the contract for The Outcast in my second book, my firstborn was 12 weeks old. So I was kind of on a journey of motherhood and trying to find that balance between following my own dreams and following my dream of becoming a mother. And it's a hard balancing act, especially if your child wants to eat every 2 hours around the clock.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a little sleep deprived and trying to just figure that all out. And I remember my husband and we went out to yogurt when she was just a little baby, and I kept the blanket over the top of the carrier because I don't want to get any germs in the yogurt place. So overboard now. Like my third child licks the floor and I don't even bat an eye. But, with my firstborn, my precious little firstborn, just watching her just coo and everything, and just thinking about what I would do to protect her life. And what if she wasn't genetically mine? But if I had carried her and she wasn't genetically mine, what would I do to protect her life? And so this whole idea just kind of came about midwifery and surrogacy. And gestational surrogacy is when you have no genetic connection to that child, but she's still in your womb. So it'd be like, what do they say? Like your oven, but like not the bread, like you're baking the baby, but it's not anything to do with you. And so that kind of just all came about. And I imagine this woman doing it for money and then later for love, because you are paid a stipend to carry the child, and then running with that child when the genetic abnormality makes the genetic parents want to abort the child. And just the sanctity of life and the beauty of motherhood and finding that balance with everything. And so I wrote that story, and it was challenging because just trying to promote The Outcast and do The Midwife, and just, that whole balancing act was sometimes hard, but it was a beautiful time too. And it was, I loved it. I look back on that season with fondness, even though it was hard at the time, which is often how we are with life, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's kind of, think of back between the past and the present. I haven't read it, but I just saw it on, so it's kind of almost like a time slip story, but not far
It is.
back.
I didn't even know really what time slip was at that point. I was so green around the middle.
Term, I think,
But it goes back and forth, and there's like a little spoiler alert here, but it starts out with Beth, the woman who has the child in her womb, does this whole thing for the couple who wants her to carry it. And then later she goes and hides with that child in an older Mennonite community in a home for Edward mothers called Hope and House. And then you have a second voice called Rhoda, and that's the midwife, the head midwife of Hope and House. And it's like 20 years later or 17 years later. And later you realize those two voices are actually one and the same. So it's the same woman, but different perspectives, because she's been jaded and kind of, has experienced a lot of pain. And so just going back and forth kind of interwove those voices. And I loved that, because even reading my old blog posts, I know one of my writer friends, Rebecca, had mentioned the last time we spoke about how my old blog posts almost seem written by a different person, but it's because I've experienced different, life. I'm not as goofy as I was when I was 22 or 25. Like, life's not always easy, and it does bring depth and it brings character, but sometimes it takes away some of that goofiness. And so kind of Beth's voice changed just as our voices changed. And yet that interweaving of those voices kind of helped show the different perspectives and how she found wholeness toward the end of the novel.
I love that. I love how you talk about that, just like the maturity and the difference and the things we go through, and how that can, and it's true. I mean, it happens to everybody. It happens to all of us. And it's just great that you can see those two perspectives in one story. And then that brings us to The Alliance, which is currently my favorite book. Usually, whatever I'm reading is like my favorite book, but this really, 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 the language, your way with words, I'm just blown away. And certainly your voice is very distinctive. I mean, it's just like, oh my gosh, I just love the rhythm of how you put words together. So now it also has gotten quite a slew of mentions and awards. Booklist named it in their top 10 Am I right? Inspirational fiction and other things too. Tell us a little bit about the Alliance.
The Alliance kind of germinated years ago. The seed for it began with my father. He was at our house and he was talking about needing heirloom seeds for the next harvest season. And heirloom seeds are seeds that they're planted and the plant will bloom and grow. And then you could take the seed inside of that plant and replant it in the next season. It'll continue to grow. So they're very necessary if you kind of want to continue to feed your family if all of the world fell apart. And he's like, we need heirloom seeds for the next harvest season. And I remember standing in that darkened kitchen and thinking, the harvest season. It sounded like the title of a novel. And my dad is a pacifist in the fact that he believes he wouldn't take up arms to defend himself and his family. Of course, he's never been placed in that position. So you never know until you're actually tested. But he's kind of said, that's something I wouldn't do. And we knew that even growing up because of his Mennonite background. And his brothers, he was too young to go to Vietnam, but his older brothers were conscientious objectors, and they served by doing like computer programs and things to help the Army that way. Mm-hmm. But my dad just was a pacifist, and my younger brother, he was about 11. I remember him saying, well, I would, defend our family. And so he just had that juxtaposition of belief systems, and that intrigued me. And so the combination of the heirloom seeds lasting us until the next harvest season, and then having the pacifist background, and I combined that and imagined an electromagnetic pulse going off and settling civilization back hundreds of years in seconds, and an older Mennonite community being affected to the point that they would have to decide if they're going to take up arms to defend themselves to go against their beliefs, or if their beliefs are actually theirs because they're genuine and true. So that all came about just slowly over time. Little pieces started dropping in. It's like I just have a little bucket and little stones get dropped in. And then eventually this whole bucket gets full, and then all the thoughts just go into the page. It's not
I mean,
it's just a little bit at a time. Is it the same thing for you?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's just like you latch onto one thing you're really interested in, and then you also suddenly start seeing it every place. Like when I first got interested in the Nazi looting of the art, and then all of a sudden I was finding books like, this was before the Monument movie, but I found books on that, and I found magazine articles on it. It's just like all of a sudden it was everywhere. So it's really interesting how that happened. And I was thinking too, like you talked about heirloom seeds and pacifism, and those are just two totally, what would ever tie those things together? But Stephen King, in his book on writing, talks about that's how we come up with original stories, by just taking two things that are just so have nothing to do with each other and putting them together. I mean, kudos to you for just being alert to those kinds of ideas. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And now I realize when I looked on your website this morning, there's a book that comes after the Alliance. And now I'm going to quickly finish reading this one.
The Divide. Alliance of the Divide. Initially, I believed this would be a trilogy, but the more I got into the story, I didn't want a middle story that would kind of just be empty, just filler material.
Middle stories are hard, yeah.
Yeah, and we wanted two really strong stories. So you have the Alliance, the Divide, and that just seemed like a good duology. And so we just put them together. And with the Alliance, it kind of comes to this climax, and you reach it, and yet there's not a lot of resolution. You have a resolution of there's a new beginning for the community. They've made choices, and they're fleeing kind of the situation that they're in, and yet they haven't begun again. And I just really I had the idea of how it would end before I even had reached the ending. And I imagine this perimeter, they build a perimeter to protect themselves, just a bunch of logs, I say like pencil points upended to pierce the sky. And I pictured this whole thing kind of being on fire at the end, and a little bit of a metaphor for how we put walls around ourselves to protect ourselves. And yet, regardless of our best, of how hard we strive, sometimes those walls are penetrated. And I just pictured this whole thing of being on fire. And so that's a little bit how the story ends. And you have this big fire and just transition and kind of pandemonium. And yet there's a little bit of resolution and threads where you can see where it's going to go. And so that's where the Divide picks up. And you have about 6 months later where I was able to show kind of the effects of the EMP and how it's, the civilization, a lot of people have passed away, have died because of lack of food, lack of medicine. Like even now, if you just pictured all of technology shutting down, what would happen? Like the nursing homes, the hospitals, people who are reliant on medicine, it would be pretty catastrophic. And I really didn't want to dabble into the cities. I didn't want to go there. Some other novels have like one second after, I believe, is one where they really delve into how all of society breaks down. But I wanted to picture how that breaking down society would affect this knit group of people, the Mennonites, because we think as Englishers, those who are not inside the Mennonite community, they would be fine. And yet, because they're self-reliant, they have community, they have resources to protect to continue living, like the heirloom seeds and the ability to plant and harvest, and just a lot of knowledge that we've forgotten or lost along the way of, supermarket chains and all of that. But the reality is a lot of the Englishers would want what they have. And so just kind of exploring that whole scenario and how government would rebuild afterward and possibly go after this community for the knowledge that they do have.
Oh, that's really great. I can't wait to get further into the story. Two, you've set this community not in the typical states we might have thought of. It's not in Pennsylvania, it's not in Ohio, it's not in this Amish country, but you've set this community. So not only are they separated by the way they live, but they are actually geographically separated because the story takes place in
Montana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My husband and I, we went on a trip to Montana about 5 years ago, and we went to visit Libby, Montana. I call it Liberty, Montana in the story, but there was an Amish community there that we went to visit, and we were contemplating moving out west at that point.
Wow.
And I know, but it's a little cold out there for me. Yeah. Everything was log. Their main source of revenue for the community was building log homes. So every outbuilding was log. If you go to many Mennonite communities, you'll see farmhouses with like wood siding painted white. Not a lot of shutters, a lot of plain buildings or tan, or just usually it's like one solid color. But this whole community was made of log. And they had a dry goods store at the beginning. They had a long lane that dissected the halves of the community, and it was ringed by mountains. And I thought, oh, this is the setting for the novel.
Yeah.
I just pictured, and then the highway was running in front. And so I just pictured the refugees walking that highway to get to wherever they were going. And this community with their dry goods store, and, like in there'd be flour, there'd be rice, there'd be cheese, there'd be meat. And we walked in that store, and I took everything that I saw and I turned it into the novel. Like they even had a little cafe. They had breads and all of that. So I just pictured everybody going in there and trying to like divvy up the food in fair portions throughout the community. So yeah, all of that was based on what I saw.
Great. So the authenticity is there, and I always love that. That's really cool. I read on your website about your lucky genes. Talk to us about your lucky genes.
Well, I wrote that a little bit with the Outcast. That pair particularly has bit the dust. And after 3 kids later, I'm not wearing those anymore. But I had a pair of lucky jeans that I just love to wear, and they had like little flares along the bottom. I got them for cheap at like TJ Maxx or something, and I just wore them all throughout college, and then wore them when I graduated too. But I don't throw a lot away, I guess.
Everyone needs a pair of jeans like that, though. You just have had forever and ever and ever, and yours are comfy. All right. Well, I also loved this from your website. So, Jolina's website's absolutely beautiful. Everyone needs to go see it. She writes that she loves dramatic soundtracks, old books, new places, abandoned trails, people watching, telling stories, and pulling weeds.
Yeah, that about sums me up.
That's so great. So great. So by dramatic soundtracks, do you mean like movie soundtracks?
Mm-hmm.
Those are my favorite too. Yeah.
I love, like when I was in college, I listened a lot to Last of the Mohicans. It's very thematic, and you have, I think one's called The Promontory. It's just like, da 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 da, and you have The Kiss, and that was beautiful. And I loved it so much that I had a little violin team, like a little mini orchestra of like young violinists, like 12 years old and 10 years old. They all played The Kiss I'll have to maybe post it later, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's just da 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 da. And so after we kissed, we walked out to that song. But it just really helps set the tone for a story if you are picturing. And somebody, I think it was RT Reviews, Romantic Times Reviews, they said like reading the lines is like watching a movie play out. And so to have a soundtrack that's very thematic, it kind of helps you get in the zone, and you could just, as the wall is burning or the plane is crashing or all these different things, you could just like really get into it. And so I love Last of the Mohicans, Jane Eyre. The new Jane Eyre is a beautiful soundtrack. Pride and Prejudice. I love Titanic, of course. Just not so much the Celine Dion song, but there's a lot of just beautiful, just haunting rhythms in there. I'm trying to think of some other ones, but yeah, they're everywhere. And YouTube, you can even just type in like emotional soundtracks or dramatic soundtracks, and you'll discover new ones you've never even known. At least for me, they're new and just gorgeous. I don't know. I was like, who has time to sit compile all these soundtracks? But we're the ones who benefit from it.
We do. Yeah, that's great. One of my favorites, this is before your time, The Incredible Hulk TV show with Bill Bixby has one of the most beautiful, as the credits play. Oh, yeah, it's just haunting. It's just, it always gets to me, even all these years later, So
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, look that one up because it's beautiful. And another favorite of mine is Doe's Eyes, which comes from that old movie, Bridges of Madison County, which is, it's a really kind of sappy movie, but that is beautiful. Doe's Eyes.
I'm gonna do a replay.
Try to find those. Those are two of my favorites. All right. Well, besides all of your wonderful novels, and they are, again, I just want, I think I say this about every author I come on, that I have on here, because I always enjoy the stories that I'm reading. That's why I have these people come and interview them. But they're truly, your writing is absolutely beautiful. I just love it. But you also write nonfiction. You have had articles, I take it, and where you're writing as a peer, that's what it says, in Reader's Digest, Writer's Digest, and Today's Christian Woman. How did you break into those great big markets?
Well, the Reader's Digest, that one was nothing that I did. That was, I think, a God thing. I remember being at home, and I had my firstborn daughter was about 2 years old. I was pregnant with my second daughter, and it was just one of those days. It was just like a winter day. I was kind of tired, and it was just gray outside, and I lived in the boonies. I still kind of live in the boonies in the middle of nowhere, but kind of isolated. And I had made Buckeyes, and I remember taking them around because it was around Christmas, and taking them around to the neighbors and coming back home. And I checked my email, and I had an email from an editor at Reader's Digest, and they wanted to publish one of my blog posts that I'd written about a librarian who had changed my life. And when I was about 10 years old, I had checked out a novel from the library with Mistress in the title. I forget the title, but it was a beautiful cover, and it had like little silver in the spokes of the wheels, and a beautiful cover. But my mom's like, we're taking that back, and we'll get you a different one. And I was an avid reader, and even at 10, I was reading adult fiction. And so but that can get you in trouble too at 10 years old. And so my mom took me back, and this beautiful librarian, she had like this auburn hair and just really pale, beautiful skin, and she had glass, one of those, it's not like a monocle, but it's on a long chain. And so it was back when the computers had like green screens, and she typed in like some things, and she's like, let me find you a book. I know the one you will like. And honestly, I thought she was going to just tell me about, I like the Boxcar Children or something that I felt was too beneath me, She instead introduced me to an author called Dodie Smith. She also wrote 101 Dalmatians, but this novel was called I Capture the Castle. And it's a coming of age story about Cassandra King, I believe. And it's the 1940s, set in a crumbling castle in England. And it transformed my world. It's beautifully done. And it's her whole coming of age story. In the opening, she's sitting in the kitchen sink writing in her journal. So the whole story is her journal. And it really resonated with me at that time of my life. Just, I had chickens like she had chickens. I wanted to be a poet like she wanted to be a poet. I was becoming aware of boys, and my attraction to them, and just everything about it resonated with me. And just, I have a little bit of a different family, and she has a very different family, and just always just gorgeous. And so I wrote about that on a blog post just randomly. And then somehow, I don't know, it came in the search engine or how they found it, but Reader's Digest purchased it. So that was really nothing I did.
No, that's wonderful. What a great story, and what a tribute too to the librarian that who did that for you. And now I want to read that book too.
It's good. It was my top favorite, but I have to say yesterday, Peace Like a River by Leif Anger, that is my new favorite novel. I
Yeah.
cried. I was in the van on the way home listening to that, and I didn't even get out. It was snowing a little bit, and I had my little green tea latte, and I finished that story, and I'm just like, oh, this is the power of fiction to like enlarge your heart, grow your faith, and it's the most beautifully written novel I think I've ever read.
It really is. It's been a long time since I've read that, but yeah, it's powerful. You're absolutely right. Right. Yeah.
Do you like audiobooks?
I do, especially when I'm driving. Yeah. I listen to John Grisham's Theodore Boone stories as I drove from Memphis here to Oklahoma this week.
It helps pass the time.
It does. It just, and I feel like I actually drive better. Like I drive slower, not because I tend to speed. I like to go. But if because I know I have to pay attention because I'm trying to listen and I want to focus on driving. So in a way, I feel like, I kind of even improve my driving when I listen to stick to the speed limit, put my cruise control on.
That's right.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, again, I loved your website. I watched the trailers. They're both so cute. The one is for, oh gosh, I'm going to forget. It was for the outcast, right? That you're reading part of the book. So please go watch that, everybody. Jolina's so cute. She's reading part of the book. Her dog comes bounding through the meadow, and it's so cute. And is that your dog?
No, that was actually my best friend had a foster dog, and we shot it in her field. So that was like a blooper that made it into a thing. But it's fun. It's like it keeps it real.
Yeah, it does keep it real. No, it's adorable because it looked like it was like something that was really planned. It was just so cute. So, and then also the trailer for The Alliance is on there, and very, very well done. That's really nice.
Thank you.
So, last thing, I always ask everybody, when you come to the end, what do you do to unwind?
When I come to the end of a novel?
Yes. Finish writing.
Well, I actually just turned in the edits for my 5th book on Monday.
Oh, wow.
And so it feels good to have, turned that in. But to unwind, I like to go outside. I like to read. It's kind of a breather for me and even for my family, like just to be with my girls and not to feel like, okay, I've got to quick get home to do this because I have this amount of time to work. And yet, despite all of that, I still need a creative project. It's just the way I work, and it helps me structure my days, and my brain just won't shut off. Like even just an image. Yesterday, I was driving home, and it was a beautiful rural area, and there was this fence row and daffodils just lining beside the fence row. And I was like, oh, I should have put that in my 5th novel. This is a rural setting. But I mean, it's just like, I don't know how long, like half a mile of daffodils. And I just pictured like somebody had to get down there with a little spade and plant daffodils for that long. And just in the middle of a rural area to create beauty like that just really spoke to me. And so I see things everywhere, and I have to put them somewhere or they just stay in my head. So I like to do that through my blog posts. It kind of helps me process, but also I enjoy doing the novels. So I'm toying with a new novel idea, but I'm also working possibly on a nonfiction project and a children's book. So
yeah, you've got a lot going on.
But the fun thing is that you could just kind of dabble with it. Like with children's book right now, I'm at a place where I can't work on it anymore. And so just kind of setting that aside. But a nonfiction project is just, we'll see. It might be for me, but who knows?
Oh, that's great. Well, I wish you the best in all of that. And again, just really highly recommend The Alliance. And you've got a copy of The Divide. Do you have any of the other books that you want to share us real quick before we?
Here's The Divide. And this is The Outcast. This was my debut. And it has a blurb by Julie Cantrell, the New York Times bestselling author of Into the Free. A must-read that will draw you into a secret world of sin and senselessness and leave you with the hope of one set free. So that was a fun little blurb to get. I had just when I received that blurb, and I was like, oh, that's beautiful. So this is The Midwife. That's the Midwife one. So, yeah.
And also, and I don't know the gentleman's name who wrote Growing Up Amish, but he says yours is the only Amish book he's read from cover to cover.
Yeah, that was Ira Wagler.
Okay, yeah.
Amish.
So that was a really high recommendation too, Word of Praise.
Yes,
Well,
I was very honored.
thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here, and just highly recommend Jolina's book. And we'll see you next time on Novelists Unwind. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Johnnie.
Thank you.